Okay, as they have now started to close the doors. Good morning, everybody. I'm happy to welcome you to this session, which is going to deal with family relationships of different kinds around the various migrations. That's in the title of the session. So that have occurred across the seas, across land, across rivers, between places. And we have two authors with us today. And I'm going to take a minute or two just to read their biographies. These are, of course, in the Macondo guide, but I thought I would just fill out some of the details here because we are, in a way, in the presence of, extremely lauded and prolific authors, and I thought it would be an opportunity just to provide some additional details. On stage with us is MG Vassanji, who is the author of 10 novels, 3 collections of short stories, a travel memoir about India, a memoir of East Africa, and a biography of Mordecai Rickler. He is a twice winner of the Giller Prize, 1994-2003, for Best Work of Fiction in Canada, the Governor General's Prize, 2009, for Best Work of Nonfiction, the Harbourfront Festival Prize, the Commonwealth Festival Book Prize, Africa 1990, and the Bressani Prize. His book, The Assassin's Song, was shortlisted for the Giller Prize, the Governor General's Prize, the Writers' Trust Award, and India's Crossword Prize. Nostalgia, his dystopian novel, was a finalist for CBC Canada Reads. His works have been translated into multiple languages: Arabic, Dutch, French, German, Hindi, Italian, Japanese, Latvian, Portuguese, Spanish, Turkish, and Kiswahili. And Vassanji has given lectures worldwide and written many essays, including introductions to the works of a number of different authors. In June 2015, he was awarded the Canada Council Molson Prize for the Arts. He was born in Nairobi, Kenya, and raised in Tanzania. He received a BS from the Massachusetts Institute for Technology and a PhD from the University of Pennsylvania before going on to live in Canada. He's a member of the Order of Canada, very prestigious. He lives in Toronto and visits East Africa and India often. Some of the novels you see here, but I'll just read a couple of additional titles. The Gunny Sack, his first novel, and then No New Land, The Book of Secrets, Amrika, The In-Between World of Vikram Lal, The Assassin's Song, The Magic of Saida, Nostalgia, Delhi Obsession, and Everything There Is, which was published in the fall of 2023, which unfortunately I have not yet the opportunity to read, but I think we should all take the time to do so. So welcome, Vassanji.
Thank you.
And on stage with him is Janika Oza, who I met for the first time, although we both live in the same city, Toronto, at this festival, which is what happens at Macondo. You have to go far away from where you live to meet amazing people that live right next door. So I think that's amazing and a testament to this festival's amazing abilities to bring people together. She's the author of a novel, A History of Burning, winner of the 2024 Asia Pacific American Award for Literature, a finalist for the 2023 Governor General's Award for Fiction, a finalist for the 2024 Carol Shields Prize, and a New York Times Editor's Choice. She is the winner of the 2022 O. Henry Award and the 2020 Kenyan Review Short Fiction Award. Janika was a 2023 Breadloaf Fiction Fellow and has received support from the Malay Colony, the Toronto Arts Council, and the Ontario Arts Council, and the Canada Council for the Arts. She is an assistant editor for the Rumpus and lives in Toronto, actually about 20 minutes from where I live. So we were quite shocked to see that we have so much in common and yet we have never met. So welcome, Janika, to the panel. Yeah. Actually, I thought, Janika, if I might indulge you just to read a passage that relates to the theme of this particular session to get us started and to get our creative juices flowing. Would you mind?
Yeah, I would love to. Hi, everyone. Hi.
It's so nice to say hi and to have it said back. That never happens at home, ever. So it's really wonderful here. So my book begins in 1898 and chronicles about 100 years. And it starts with a young boy named Pirbai who is taken from his village in India to become an indentured laborer in East Africa on the railway. So that's the start. I'm giving you that context because I'm not going to read from that part. I'm going to read from about 50 years later, another wave of migration. So this is a young woman named Rajni who has left her family in partitioning India to marry a man who lives in Uganda, a man named Vinod. And so in this chapter, she's just arriving. So this is Rajni, 1948. She arrived into a home that wanted her, yet she herself had never before felt so alone. The journey from Karachi to Mombasa via steamer took 1 month, the longest time Rajni had ever spent on her own, although the ship was packed full, the saris strung between the bunks the only separation among them. Though she made friends on the ship, taking her meals with a group of young women who were all traveling unaccompanied or with small children, each night she went to sleep feeling a little more hollow, as if a part of her were leaking into the dark sea. In that untethered space, she felt another self flickering inside her, splintering apart. Her new family met her at the station in Mombasa. Papa, Mama, and Vinod, and the four of them sat together on the train to Kampala in near silence, Papa squeezing his hands as if to keep them from trembling, Mama gazing wistfully out the window, and only Vinod making small attempts at conversation, though mostly they revolved around her needs. Was she thirsty? Could he buy her some oranges? Had she slept well on the ship? As if she were merely a body to tend to. She sat subdued, wondering how much of herself remained. Vinod, it seemed, had made a choice to accept her from the moment he laid eyes on her. He was sensitive to her, if a little nervous, and she got the feeling that he had resolved to do what he could to love her. She supposed that was marriage, resolving to care for another. Yet she herself had made only the choice to leave, though she had done so for love of her family, not of Vinod. The first time he touched her, gingerly stroking her arm before asking if she would prefer lemon soda or orange, she knew she too would have to find the resolve to love him, that to build a passage across the void she felt would require attention, work. In her blue suitcase, she had carried jewelry, her best clothes. Knotted into the sari she departed and arrived in was a dark river stone her brother Mohan had given her before she set sail, ridged on one side as if carrying the ghost of an ancient body. Mohan, not understanding the permanence of her leaving, had asked as she gathered him in her arms if he could accompany her to the market the next time she went for vegetables. Of course, she told him, unable to say anything more. Though the rest of her belongings were unpacked into cupboards and shelves, the stone she tucked into the inner flap of her suitcase. She could not bear to erode it with her fingers and blunt its surface. It carried many ghosts now, not just her brothers, but the land they had all left. Like a fossil, it bore only a fragment of the life they had lived. Thank you.
Thank you. It's often difficult to talk about social relationships, particularly ones that relate to, intimate situations. The first time you meet your life partner, your wife, your husband, the first time you might have met, a mother that you never knew. So the first time you discover that all of a sudden the person that thought you was your father is actually not your father, or that your father might have had two wives. I think many of these kinds of experiences are explored in your novels, And Janika, you've just mentioned, pardon me? I'm just saying, in some of your novels, you talk. I didn't want to specify. There's so many. Yeah. So I was thinking about the novels that you've written and the many novels that you've written. Partly they're all almost a number of them are set within this context of migration from the Indian subcontinent to East Africa in the first instance. Tell us a little bit, Vassanji, about uh, why you selected this particular sort of arena. Obviously, we know, some of us know why, but maybe you wanted to tell us a little bit more about what struck you about this particular context in which to tell some of the stories that you've told in some of your novels.
To tell us the story, well, there are two reasons. One is there's just a need to tell stories.
I think your microphone's not on. Yeah, just maybe press it again.
Keep pressing it. Oh, so there's a need to tell stories. It's something that you feel you have to do. They're running around in your head and in your heart. And then at some point, there may be a catalyst that pushes you into actually not just saying I'm writing or writing in your notebook or as I meet many people telling me I'm writing, but to actually write, to finish, and to produce something. And that is a big step. And for me, that came when I first arrived in Toronto.
Maybe it's on already. It's on.
You on here? Yeah? Yeah. So shall I start again?
Please do.
Only if there's a need. But I think for me, there was always a need to write. And I remember I was a big reader. And I would ask myself once in a while, when can I read a story that's set in Dar es Salaam or on Uhuru Street about ordinary people, which doesn't mean that we did not identify with characters who lived outside of the city or the continent. But there was never a book in my childhood. We read Enid Blyton and Agatha Christie and Perry Mason and later on moved to James Bond and whatever, or something serious. But nothing that was directly you could identify with. So there was that need from the beginning. And then I think there were the stories that we heard as children from grandparents and how grandmother got lost near Jamnagar, and how my mother met her husband in Mombasa, and from across the street. She didn't meet him. She showed him from across the street. She said, "There is the guy." She said, "Okay," and stories like that. And then there were stories we heard in school, I guess, from the history books about the Maji Maji war or rebellion, whatever you want to call it. There were the stories about the time of the independence of the East African countries. There were stories about Mozambique and South Africa and all the countries that were not liberated, which were very much a part of our consciousness in high school. So when I arrived in Toronto with all these stories, and there were mythological stories, magic. How the sun came down and it roasted a piece of meat and so we had those stories, and what to do with them. And I felt maybe it's just me. Everyone else, is happily running, looking for a job actually. I had a job as a postdoctoral fellow, but the thing was, these stories sort of seemed to be a burden on my head or on my back. I imagined, I had also read Hermann Hesse. So there was this romantic image of a young man. And I had this image of a young man burdened by a sack of memories. And I don't know what happened, but at some point, it seemed, and I started my novel with one sentence. Memory is like can you read it? This was more than 20 years ago. Come on. That's
Just a second, I'll get it. Do you want to read it?
No, in just one sentence, the first one.
It says, memory, Jibai would say, is this old sack here this poor deer that nobody has any use for anymore.
Yeah, yes, memory is like a gunny sack, It's full of these objects in random order. And then this character that I created called Salim, he starts picking out first from his memories and then real objects. He imagines. So the novelist then creates a gunny sack with real objects. And each object then reminds him of something. So there's a shirt with blood stains on it, which comes from the time of the Maji Maji. And there's another, a tasbih, which reminds, rosary, which reminds him of something else, and so on. So then the whole kind of, and the novel then becomes a list of connected memories, which of course I think, personally, a clever trick to it, because depending on on the order in which you pick out the objects, the story is told differently. I'm sorry if I took so long, but
Not at all. We're here to have a conversation, and please don't constrain yourself in terms of time. We have plenty of time. Sawa? Okay. Okay, great. Terrific. Janika, what are your thoughts about these kinds of stories and the context they're set in? Why did you choose to build your novel around this particular early history and then move on to the contemporary period?
Yeah, I think for me it's interesting hearing you talk about this sort of having all of these stories and then coming to writing the novel with all of that, because for me it felt sort of like the opposite. It felt like I had an absence of stories in my life about my family's experience in Uganda and my family history, which has roots in Kenya and Uganda from 4 generations ago. And so for me, there was this sort of very loud silence, and that is what really drew me in, because I had the sense that there was so much there, so much that I didn't know, and that I desperately wanted to know. And as somebody who when there's something I don't know or don't understand, I turn to writing, and so this story sort of emerged. This family really came to me first, the family in the novel, and I saw them very clearly. I saw this scene of this family sitting around the table, and I knew they were in Kampala. I knew it was 1971, and it was so vivid to me, and I felt like I knew them because these characters are so familiar to me. There's this intimacy that we have because of my family, because it's my community, and at the same time, there was so much that I didn't know in order to keep writing that story. And so that is really what drove me, years and years of writing this book, was trying to uncover these stories, trying to speak to as many people as I could, family, and my family connected me to family I didn't know I had, who connected me to, more community sort of scattered across the world after the expulsion of Asians from Uganda, which, my family was a part of that exodus. And so it was really a process of sort of uncovering and discovering and just sort of absorbing these stories, and I guess in a sense then, collecting these memories, memories that are not mine, but that are ancestrally connected. And then parsing through them and writing the book.
Yeah, I think there's something quite remarkable. Sorry, please, yes, go ahead.
I think, for some of us, and I think many of us of Khoja origin in East Africa, and I suppose even in India, we never had a history. Like there's no written history. We only had little bits of stories and magic. So there was at some point a need to tell the story of a people. And when you're outside in the world, where everyone is from somewhere, there's so much written about, the presidents of the United States and the history of the world. And here you are with no knowledge of, who you are. So then there's also a need to become a historian, a myth maker, to create a ground zero, and to tell the world, I also exist.
Yeah, that's important for all of us. I mean, I couldn't say it in more eloquently than you. I was curious about that very thing. I was just about to ask this question. What has, what in your view, has been the impediment or the reason why these stories have not been written, these histories have been, in a sense, missed out of the sort of large canon of history that you're familiar with? And how do young writers or people who are starting off deal with this absence? Because it's not, although you have written many novels and you've written this fantastic new novel, it still remains a big gap in historical literature, fictional writing about history.
This is what you have to tell the kids.
Yeah.
If you don't tell your stories, the world will tell your story. Or there's a proverb in Swahili, if I may indulge.
Yeah, please do.
Akifunzwa na mamaye, hufunzwa na dunia. Very similar. If you're not taught by your mother, the world will teach you. And once I said that in Durban to some school kids, that if you know what the world says about South Africa, AIDS, war, and then they were really struck by that. And the one girl at the end came over to me and said, "Sir, you will hear about me."
Yeah. Janika, in Canada, this is where you live. This is a big struggle. Well, you live there too, but also I was thinking this seems to be, remains a perennial problem, despite the fact that we now have authors who are writing and producing incredible work, and historians who are writing these stories. It still remains a struggle. How have you dealt with it, and what is your thinking about that?
Yeah, I think, that was my experience growing up in Toronto, which is where I was born, and you didn't hear about our history or our community in any place. It's not in the history books, not in the textbooks. You didn't learn about it at school. It's truly been kind of amazing for me to come here and to feel how this sort of context and history is just so much more understood in a way that I've never experienced before, And so that was really striking to me, just never hearing it. And then at the same time, I was not hearing about it at home either. And that's for a totally different reason, which is that these are painful stories, difficult things to recount. And so at home, we're also not talking about it. And so there's just this sort of absence. And I think, it is, the landscape is changing. In Canada, at least, there is, more space for these stories. But there is still, we're still existing in these structures that create this sort of false competition and make it so that, if there's one story out there, then that is the story. And, there isn't room made for more. When in fact there's a multiplicity of narratives that could come out of, Indo-Ugandan community, Indo-Kenyan community. There's no one defining story or experience, right? And I think that is the challenge. For me, I think, I wanted to write the story that felt compelling and right for me. I wasn't really, when I was writing, I wasn't thinking about, well, I want to tell a defining story. I want everybody to understand. I was thinking about the characters in this book and just this sort of emotional heart of the story. And yeah, it was really about story, and if you're telling a good story, people will listen.
Yeah, the reason why, as someone who is an academic working in a Western university, I'm always struck by the fact that the history department has 20 or 10 to 20 people working on European history from 1500 to 1800, and one person on Africa or Asia dealing with from the Neolithic up to the modern day. It's a perennial problem, and as you said, that's enough. Nothing happened. History didn't exist in these places, and so I think even from the perspective of the literary world, this becomes an issue, right? We have one very famous, Canadian, Kenyan, Tanzanian writer. What about the others? And I think that the work that you have done in Canada is such a huge bonus because you and Nurjan, who's there, have set up a press, have established an incredible space for authors of non-European origin to kind of address some of the stories that you've just mentioned that need to be written. How has that struggle been for you? Can you, because you talk a little bit about it in this book of
Essays.
essays, yeah, called Nowhere Exactly.
About the publishing venture.
Yeah, the
Well,
publishing.
it's the same story. When I was in the US, there were quite a few people from, I think, Tanzania, from the same schools, coincidentally, my schoolmates, and then from the corresponding girls' school. We would meet in Manhattan, and Christmas time, they would get together and start chatting and whatever. And there was one question arose. I would like to think I was the instigator, but anyway, he said, "Where are our stories? You had the New York Times. We all read the New York Times. The book pages, and you went to the bookstores and you see all these books from by British and American writers mostly, and a few Europeans, and the book chatter. You gossip about authors. It was all about white authors. Not us. So we said, where are our stories? So we kept saying that all the time. But when all of us coincidentally one night happened to be in Toronto, downtown, this question came arose again midnight. People not even knowing what they were saying, but where are our stories? Where are our media that we can. Even in those days when I went to university, you had to order V.S. Naipaul and who was the other Indian author, forget his name, the famous South Indian, yeah. And then some books would come from India, all the way from India. So then one of us said, but do something. Basically, put your money where your mouth is. Well, we didn't have too much money, but we said, yeah, why not do it? I would say it was the most stupid decision we made. One of us was a lawyer, so he went and registered, opened a bank account. We put in $650 each and started writing to people. But once we got into that in 1981, it was like a bit endless. So much work, so much of your personal life, money, insults. I don't know. Even Nujan and I sometimes wonder how on earth did we get this? But we did. We published more than 100 writers. Some of them became famous, like Kagiso Molope. I don't know if you've heard of her. Yeah. And now she's published by a bigger press, McLaren and Stewart. And Yvonne Vera, we published her collection of stories. In fact, I gave the title of that collection. I told her, use this one, which is called Why Don't You Carve Other Animals? But she decided to go back to Zimbabwe, and it was published by Baobab Press. And I won the Commonwealth Prize, was shortlisted, and is considered one of the kind of primary black African women writers. So, there was some satisfying stuff. Or when Sam Selvan came and, I told him, can you publish one of your books? I don't know how many of you know Sam Selvan. I even called him in London and he said, boy, you are a fast mover. So we have had some good moments, and we had book launches. And about starting 2009, 11, we got so fed up with the international festivals in Toronto and elsewhere, because they were all from Europe and the United States and Britain. Now, the reason why they could bring them was because all the governments, the British Council, State Department, Alliance Francaise, whatever, they would support them. But who's going to support an African writer? Not an African government. you know. So, they were not there, and we kept complaining, where are the African writers? Where are the Asian writers? So we started our own festival, another act of folly. You know. So, it's been like that. The pull is there, you do it, and then you wonder, why did I do it? And then many people don't even care.
Yeah, I think that this is an interesting. I mean, people often think about, and if you forgive me, this is my opinion, not the opinion of the two people on the stage here. Is Canada is a very sort of open, welcoming, multicultural society, and the experiences that you're describing and having to kind of push against the dominant culture remains central to many writers, authors, artists, academics, and so on. And in fact, Janika and I were talking that we feel that Kenya is living what Canada should be experiencing, in some ways, in terms of what we're experiencing here at this festival. I wanted to ask you, moving to more centrally to the theme of this panel, because I think people have come here, but thank you, that was a very helpful context. How was this book received by your family, given the fact that you wrote it doing research with them and an extended group of people? How was your book received by your family?
Yeah, so I mean, I couldn't have written this book without speaking to my family, and I tried very hard to write this book without speaking to my family. And I tried for I want to say 2 years. I tried to just read and research, and going back to what we were talking about, there was just not enough there, and it just became so clear to me. Well, if I want to write this book, I have to speak to my family. As scary as that is, and so it was then years and years of doing that, not just family. It expanded outwards. But so for me, at the end of all of that, I thought, okay, well, I've written this book. I want them to read it. It feels very important for me to, share this with them. And at the same time, I wanted to find the right timing to share it with them. I didn't want to do it too early where I would feel like I was asking for some sort of permission from them, because in the end, this is fiction. I was trying to tell a certain story, and had some loyalty to the truth, and just didn't want to feel like there were these other voices in my head telling me to change it. And at the same time, I felt I didn't want them to encounter it when it was already out there and other people were also encountering it. And so when you publish a novel, there's something called advanced copies, which come in, maybe 6 months or so to a year before the book actually goes out there. And so that's what I gave to my family. That felt like the right timing. And it was a really moving experience for me to share it with them. They really connected with it. And, I still remember some of the things my dad said to me about, when he was first reading the book, he was sort of live texting me on WhatsApp his reactions, and I was like, Dad, this is so. I was just sitting on the couch, like anxiously waiting for his next text, and I was like, this is too much. Please, just let me know when you're finished how you felt. And he said that reading the book felt like deja vu, and he said it felt like a magical memory or dream, and that it brought back to life so many memories and stories that he had forgotten or repressed or buried. And, that was a mixed feeling for him, because some of that was very painful or difficult to encounter in the book, but some of that was also very beautiful and delightful. And so, I think for me that going into then the book coming out into a wider audience with that, knowing that the people who I actually wrote this for, and in a sense, not with, but because of, who I couldn't have written it without, knowing that they had felt some sort of connection and had felt in a way seen by the work, that to me remains the core, and has remained the core, even a year and a half or more into publication now, when there are so many more voices in the room telling me what they thought. Really that to me remains at the heart. And it feels like, no matter what happens with the book, there is that.
Yeah, I mean, when I read it, of course, it's my history, because I was part of that group of families that was expelled from Uganda. And although I was born in Nairobi in Kenya, my mother was from here, my father was from Kampala. Some of the moments that you describe were so palpable to me, and although I was a young child, I lived the legacy of that through my parents' stories about those moments as much as my own experience of it. And I was so grateful that in 2024 we now have yet another important novel which discusses some of the experiences that those families went through. And it's interesting, it comes at a really crucial moment, and it speaks to your question about not having these stories, is that there are now some historians who are writing about this moment in really quite disturbing ways, talking about the fact that the memories that people have of the expulsion are actually false memories, and denying some of the stories that you might have heard in your research. And that is an interesting question about the relationship between fiction and history, and how do we broker those relationships in terms of our writing, in terms of our storytelling, in terms of our own experience of an event, recognizing that it may not be the only experience, but how do we think about that in terms of writers and scholars and so on. I'm going to leave that question open because I know that one of the things about Macondo is we want to give full time to audience. So I'm going to just leave that open in terms of thinking about the relationships that that are described in some of these novels and what we've talked about so far. I'm going to turn it over to you folks and say, do you have questions for Janika or Vassanji that you'd like to ask? We're very open. I think the microphone is available. Is there something? Is there a hand up? I saw a hand up. Yes, please, go ahead.
So I am a history teacher.
Just wait for the microphone because I think it's going out. People need to hear your voice. So thank you so much. Yeah.
Testing.
Perfect.
All right.
Thank you.
So I am a history teacher, and I thought, Vassanji, your comment about myth making and so on is really important to telling stories. I was thinking about Chatterjee and Indian nationalism historically. I'm kind of curious because I teach a lot of 20th century Africa, and it's actually very, very difficult to resource at the secondary level. So I'm kind of curious in terms of publication, specifically Janika, what was it like to try to get this story published? Did you feel a lot of difficulty because people saw it as a minor story, or was that fairly easy? You found a specific sympathetic publisher?
Thank you. Yeah, it's Janika.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, I think my experience is just my one experience, and in fact, my publication actually did happen quite quickly and easily. So I felt very fortunate in that sense. I think there are so many people who are trying to tell stories like this one who have been really, and I have friends in this position who it's been really difficult to be published, and publishing, despite being where I am now, it still feels like a sort of opaque world where you don't quite know what goes on inside it, or who you have to know in order to get there. But it does feel like there is really this sense of this sort of tokenizing of if we already have one story coming out from this publishing house, from an Indian author or an African author or this or that, then that is the one, and so yeah, I think I'm just trying to qualify because I did have a positive publishing experience, and I will say too that for me a big part of that was finding the editors who understood my work. In Canada, I work with Anita Chong, who's very well known, and in the U.S., Seema Mahanian. It's not a coincidence that both of my editors are women of color, children of immigrants and refugees, and so they understood the work, and I deeply felt that, and so they were they were championing the book and really pushing it. And I think when you find the people who are in your corner who believe in the work, then that that community really, really helps. Not helps, it creates it, right? So that was my experience with it. Yeah, I don't know if either of you want.
Yeah, she came 20 years or so after me. So
Yeah, absolutely.
you had a positive experience because I had paved the way for it. No, seriously, I have a story. Because when I wrote the gunny sack, I knew for a fact that it would not be published in Canada. There was no interest in Africa except as to bring refugees from Uganda or wherever. There was just, even today, I mean, it's not, you go to a bookstore, it's still a minor kind of field. You will not find Abdul Razak Gurna in the bookstores. So I knew there would not be published, but I knew one thing for a fact also, that there was this thing called the African Writers Series, which came out from England, London, and one of the editors was had been Chinua Achebe, who in fact had come to our school in Dar es Salaam. So I sent it to them. And I also sent a collection of stories to them. Stories are easier to write. And it turned out one of the referees was in fact Abdul Razak Gurna. So we have a history going back. But another referee was Peter Nazareth, a Ugandan refugee. You know him, right? Mm-hmm. He supported me a lot, and supported a lot of African writers by inviting them to Iowa. So when my book was accepted by the Heinemann, African Writers Series, and then suddenly it was shortlisted for the Commonwealth Prize, Africa region. I was happy, Africa region, that's my region. And someone got wind of it in a local television station. So they called me up. Peter Nazareth had invited me to go to Iowa to the International Writers Program. So I went there. So these guys from the television station interviewed me. When the interview came out, I had already sent the manuscript because you are desperate. You will send it to anyone. I had sent it to McLaren Stewart, your publisher. And of course, they waited months before even replying. But once the book was coming out in England, it had been won a prize for first novel. Then Ellen Seligman, the publisher, was the editor before yours, whom also I know. I spoke with her, she picked up the phone, and but still, this book was too hard for them. But by that time, I had written a book, a kind of fun book, set in Toronto, about these Tanzanian immigrants coming in. And then they grabbed it, because now they could have it both ways. A Toronto novel and by brown guy. So that's how I got my, and then after that, I wrote another novel, which won a prize for McLaren and Stewart, and then the story started. But it was not easy at all. It was when my hair began turning white. I can tell you that.
Yeah, let's have some more questions. Thank you both. Please, microphone. Maybe here in the front and then in the well, either or, doesn't matter. Sorry, it's either. Maybe here, whichever one. You're both going to get a chance, so don't worry.
Thank you. Thinking about the theme of the session, migration, and the stories you all have told in your fiction as well as in your real life lived experience, thinking about forced migration, migration under duress, free migration, what lessons do you have or do you think about in our contemporary world, in a warming world where people are going to be forced to move and we're seeing increasingly militarized borders and militarized responses to migration?
See, if you're a refugee and you have to escape, that's one, So I don't have an experience of such people, although I could find out because in my community, a lot of Afghan refugees have come. But then there's the other kind of immigrant or migrant or whatever, who left in the 60s from the Commonwealth countries, somehow imagining that the Queen's sort of rule was much better than the rule of Nyerere or Kenyatta or whatever. And once they had gone, maybe for some for good reasons, some just because of they had been brainwashed by the colonial government and the books they had read and the movies they had seen. Once they had gone, then it was not easy. There were people who went from Tanzania who were spat upon. So here you're complaining about Africans and the whites are spitting on you. So that phase, of course, is over. Although I wondered why someone didn't spit back at them, but I was so scared. Scared of the Africans here, scared of the whites there. So for them, it was a painful experience. And for someone like me who left, who was not chased out, who had no grievance except in the minor teenage grievances, but went because of idealism. I wanted to go out, get a PhD, come back and teach. So when people started living, that was the greatest shock in my life. I've never not got over it. I don't think my wife has also got over it. For us, it's a daily occurrence, daily thought that, where is home? And home is still Dar es Salaam. I have a friend who's lived in Philadelphia for 50 years, 40 of those years as a full professor at Penn, and he just moved to Toronto because Philadelphia, so he wanted to move where the community was. And he says openly, he's been to Dar es Salaam back in 50 years only twice, but he says Dar es Salaam is home. So that idea of home, and this is why yesterday I overreacted to somehow being described as Canada, when in fact for us, every day of the week, what is home, where is home, is a daily occurrence. It's a painful thought. So this is one side. The other side is where refugees are, people are refugees, they're chased out, and in Canada at least they're a little freer. If you are there chased out into the United States, they're almost forced to raise the flag, "Hey, I'm American." But what happens to them afterwards, we don't know. I don't know if that is any help, and I just felt I had to say that,
No, I think that there are stories coming about climate refugees, people who are, we're living right now a situation of horrific proportions in Palestine, of this experience of people, not having anywhere to go. And so I think that these are awful and terrible occurrences. When I was moving from Uganda, we thought it couldn't get worse than this. That moment, I remember of my mom having to go through the security checks, and in front of me, completely almost stripped down, as a result of being checked to see if she was carrying any jewelry or anything with her. And then arriving in Canada and being stoned by European kids, and then having to be driven to school in a police car because it was so dangerous in a suburb of Vancouver. I mean, these are, horrific experiences, but we're living other horrific experiences now on a mass scale. And I suppose that this will continue, where migration is the norm in human history. It's not the exception, but I think that's something that we will have to look forward to. But I wanted to stop and give you a chance to ask your question, and then maybe Janika can respond if the question is for her or for both of you. Yeah.
Hello, guys. I want to say thank you for this chance and this moment to be able to share amongst writers and, get to learn so much. I wanted to appreciate MG Vassanji, I hope I've said it rightly, for saying that statement, like, what you did years back is what is paving way for these young writers who are coming up. And that is really important because the things that you do are the ones who are helping us, like the new generation, to be able to do things easier and to be able to find favors and be able to get the chance to do what we couldn't do before. And it also relates to how you say that you came up with a festival, you came up with a publishing house so that you could be able to tell the stories instead of complaining and being like, there's no story for that. Because I relate so much to that because like as an African, you realize like, you don't get support from your government. That is never going to happen.
Yes.
And so you're always losing, you're losing the battle even before you begin it. And and you have to look for other people who are gonna favor you or charities that are gonna come up and help you. But within looking at ourselves and among ourselves, if we can be able to pick up on that and say, we will be able to come together no matter the challenges and just create communities, no matter how small they are at first, to be able to propel the need to tell our stories and to support them. We actually need to do that, and it's not a bad idea. The other thing I wanted to say, to ask now is to both of you, I know when you look at your history and there's nothing there, it's like a blank page. There's nothing to begin from. It's like, it's just an empty space. And then, so how are you able to, the way you said we make meats and everything, so what sort of tools as writers, imaginative tools, creative tools, structural tools that you use that enable you to be able to feel that, to start filling that blank space and that empty space, because there's nothing that you can
Can I
learn
get
from.
to this, because I have just a short answer, then Janika. See, this blank page is an advantage because you have all the room to create. But those who are in Europe and America, there's very little space, so they complain about writer's block. When people ask me about writer's block, I said, I have no time for writer's block. I have stories to tell.
Janika.
I think for me, actually, it wasn't quite a blank page, because there was a narrative there. It's just that the narrative was not our narrative, right? It was this constructed narrative that was, it's this colonial narrative, and that's what's dominant, and that's what's out there. That's all that I was encountering. And even when I was beginning to do my research for the book, I was just coming up, it was all the archives were just British newspapers talking about the influx of Ugandan Asians coming in, and just these like horribly racist articles that were also really glorifying the British role, and I was just reading these things and thinking, well, everything that I've heard from people that I know just completely goes against all of this. And so it was just becoming more and more clear to me that, yes, there is a story there. It's just not our story. And so in a way, there's sort of this fight that I was coming to it with, right? And I think for many of us, it's like, yeah, history is not a blank page. It's something that we are trying to actively dismantle first, and then sort of recreating, reclaiming. That word has been going around a lot, I think, at Macondo this weekend, because it's so true, right? And then I think also in the end, that's also the beauty of fiction, right? That where there is blank, where there is space, you get to ask questions, you get to follow your curiosity, but you also get to imagine, right? And that imagination is not coming from nowhere. It's not coming from outer space. It's coming from your lived experience and emotions and everything you've absorbed. And yeah.
I think there's also the space to be affective in fiction, whereas histories tend to not have sensory experiences. You were describing in the very beginning of your reading yesterday the idea of what it felt like to step on the soil. That a historian is never going to write that moment, right? It's kind of, although I think that's very powerful. I wanted to take a few more questions because we have I don't want to deprive anybody of. Yes, please, in the back there. Thank you.
I am very grateful for the two sessions that I have attended with the two writers, and I'm also very grateful for their books. Growing up country, there was always in every town a shop owned by an Indian trader, and they'd sell things on wholesale to other retailers. And we didn't know how to relate with these kids who were growing up in our towns, and they were everywhere. I grew up in Moranga, we had them. Maragua, they were even in the really little towns. Saba, they were there. Thika, they were there. And in my young mind, they were such an alien people that I didn't realize that even at my age, I still consider Kenyan Indians, And it was so great to hear Vassanji say he is Tanzanian and Dar es Salaam is home. And I realized, oh my God, I'm here complaining about, sorry, this might be a bit political, but I'm complaining about Trump and his nationalistic ideas. But it's the same thing here if we cannot expand the sense of what it means to be Kenyan, what it means to be African, who is an African. And so reading Janika's book, Vikram Lal, and many others that I now intend to read, I think it's a really beautiful gift for us as Kenyans of African descent to be able to open up our hearts to the Indians who are actually Kenyans and Africans in this country. So I just want to thank you. It's a gift that personally I'm taking away from this festival.
Thank you so much for your comment. I have one question here in the front as well. Yeah, please
Hi.
go ahead.
Sorry, I was also struck about the comment, Vassanji, you made about being a myth maker, right? Because my assumption is you've always had a history. So was it about the lack of a written popular history? And so what was the process of being, I guess, a pioneering myth maker? Can you just expand on what you meant by that? Because I don't think it was a blank page per se, but so what was that like?
You mean being a myth maker?
Back.
Because there is no such thing as absolute truth. Even the historians don't have it completely. They also join dots and make up stories and interpretations. But myth maker, if you know half a story, or if you know one kind of a miracle, for example, the novelist can make up another kind of miracle. There is something called what's called the poetic truth, which some people believe is more true than historical truth, because it digs into your heart and soul, what people are like, and you can create truths which, basically which are myths. Because there's no one who's going to prove or disprove what you said. But you create a story which makes sense to people. So when I wrote the Ganesak, I created some characters out of real characters, but I fictionalized them completely, gave them different names and so on. But then once in a while I meet someone who says, that character, he was my grandfather. I should keep away from such people. So it happens that you think you've created something fictional, and people identify with it. They say, yeah, it's true, it was my grandfather, it was my aunt. There was some called Mama Godoro in Uhuru Street. People believe that they knew her, So that's what I mean by myth maker, a collection of stories made by a novelist or short story writer that then become part of the story collection or the story of a community. And then it becomes part of the story of a nation or a country. So that's a myth. And most myths would be created like that. No one was writing exact data,
Janika, did you want to think about? No. Okay. This is good. Okay, I think we have time for one more question.
I have an anecdote. Will you allow me great indulgence?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I have to say it.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah.
Please do, yeah.
Now, last April, there's a place in Portugal that I go to hide every year to write.
Tell us the name so we can all visit
no,
you
no,
there.
No, no way. Even my family doesn't know it. Nujan knows, but not my brothers and sisters or friends. I hide there and I just all alone. I walk, I listen to music, I write, eat fish, and then after 4 weeks she comes and then it's eat and drink. It's fine. But I was there completely settled. My jet lag, just got out of my jet lag. I was looking at the copy edits of the last novel. And then I get a letter by email in Kiswahili from the Ministry of Education in Tanzania, inviting me to something called Tuzo Nyerere, which is the Nyerere Prize. Now, I didn't know how to respond because, I wanted to finish my novel. It had been, some years before I'd been to, after I'd been to Dar es Salaam. But, so I said, look, I'm busy, nina kazi, na hivi. And they said, please come, But this was a call from the motherland, right? So I had to say yes. So I said yes. They were paying it, fare and, first class, business class, hotel, so on. But I think at this stage in my life, it's not always an attraction. But I went, and I was treated royally, And I told them, they wanted me to give a speech. I said, I always replied in Swahili, with some help from Google Translate. So a little kidogo too. So I wrote to them, and then the visa came, and the ticket came, and I went, and there was a big event. It was first Tuzo Nyerere, prize for writing in Kiswahili. And we all had to hand out some prizes. And then I had to, one of the, other guests of honor was Abdulatif Abdallah. I don't know if he's here. And I had not seen him in 25 years. So it was a nice event, a few hundred people there, and I had to give a speech, and I told them, I'll speak partly in Kiingereza. They said, no problem. So I did that. And it was a wonderful event, and I went to the usual Katie shop, had my bhajia, and came back. And when we were driven back, Abdulatif and I, to the airport, I saw there were posters on walls. They said, "Nani kama mama," because Mama is the president of Tanzania. She's called Mama. But at that point, it hit me. Nani kama mama. For me, Mama was not the president, it was Dar es Salaam. And then I was so emotional that, as I said there in my speech, ningelia machozi. So that's what your homeland, what nyumbani means. Tumerudi nyumbani, ndio hapo.
Thank you. I'd like, Janika, if you're going to go back to Canada, having been at Macondo, what are you taking away with you? Back to home or not?
I was talking about actually somebody here in the audience yesterday. We were chatting about this, and they were asking me a similar question, and I was saying that for me, my great-grandfather came from India to Kenya, to Kisumu, and my family was here and then in Uganda until the expulsion. And this is my first time coming to Kenya because of writing this book. And so for me, I think it will take a long time to process what that actually means. Sorry, I'm getting...
Can I say what I'm taking?
Yes.
Yeah?
Please take away.
What I'm taking.
I would like to finish.
Yeah, please. Okay. She's just going to finish, Vassanji.
I thought you had finished.
No, please do finish. Okay.
No, I was just having a small cry break. It happens sometimes. But no, really, I think it will take a long time for me to process that. But truly being able to be here and just like step on soil, because I wrote this book. It's felt very strange to be here without my family, I will say that. But also, I've never been in a festival space like this where, and I've done many, many events in Canada and the US for the last year and a half, and I've never, there's a sort of a sense when I'm talking about my book in North America of like having to prove being Indian, being Ugandan, like even just like understanding what that means and the duality of it and the context and the history, that here when I step into the rooms, it feels just accepted, and understood at a base level. I've never experienced that before, and yeah, it's incredible. So thank you.
Thank you.
What I'm taking with me.
Please do.
I had a conversation with Nurjan, my wife, and I said, we should start a festival like this in Toronto. We've had festivals. I thought, it's time now with the publishing company gone, to start something like this.
How about we call it Macondo West? And on that note, I'd like to thank everybody for this session, and especially our speakers, our panelists, Vassanji and Janika Oza. And I'd like to personally also thank Anya and Yvonne for inviting me to participate in this festival. And what I'm going to take away is just immeasurable. And I hope all of you find a place in your heart for Macondo for future years as well. Thank you.